Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this beginning of 2026 and our first Great Books webinar as we contemplate some of the great thinking and great deliberations of the human species as expressed through the written word. We have a very full program already lined up for 2026. Georgie Zabo and I'll be giving the first two lectures for January and February, then back again in May and June. And then we have a number of our students and colleagues who will be representing the books that have had the greatest influence on their lives. So this is very exciting. This is one of my favorite courses here at Ubiquity. And so off we go. I want to begin with a summation of what constitutes a great book. I would like to then talk about how are we on gallery view or what's there we go. I'd like to first talk about what constitutes a great book. I would like to then give us summation of the world situation in which we find ourselves and the importance of contemplating books like the Foundations of Tibetan Buddhism, which will be our text for the next 2 months. And then I would like to talk about Lama Anarika Govinda. Then I will conclude with some very cursory statements, but I think important statements about the importance of Buddhism in our world. And then next month, as I usually do, those of you who've been in the Great Books program over the years will get very textual, and I'll dive into the foundations of Tibetan Buddhism as a text and explicate to the degree I'm able some of the great truths with which Lama Anarika Govinda grappled. And I chose the Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism as the book that I wanted to comment on for reasons that I'll go into in a few moments. But I want to, in the first instance, everyone, in addition to welcoming everyone, I want to contemplate what actually constitutes a great book. There have been probably millions written, but the books that are considered great are only a handful against the millions that have been written. Most are never remembered. And some are not only remembered, but memorized and host thousands of other books as commentaries. So, what constitutes a great book? I think there are three qualities, probably among many others, but three qualities, at least for me, having studied great books all of my life. I'm an avid reader. I generally read between 20 and 30 books a year. I have been an avid reader since I was a little boy. So I've contemplated, what makes a book great? And I think the first thing that one can say about all great books is that they're dealing with noble themes. They're dealing with issues that matter. They're contemplating either through prose or poetry, through narrative, through fiction, through nonfiction, through spiritual exercise, those aspects of our humanity which serve as the wellspring to the potential we seek to animate in our lives in this brief, ephemeral moment against the backdrop of eternity. And great books delve into those themes of love and justice, courage, fortitude, promiscuity, violence, destructiveness, spirituality, sacrilege, all those aspects that characterize the complex reality of what it means to be human. We navigate through these aspects of ourselves all our lives. And great books, through what they reveal about the author, challenge us to examine our lives more deeply. The second thing that I think characterizes a great book is that they are universal. They endure over time and across cultures. Many books are very specific and provincial, but there are books that may be instant classics. For example, one thinks of J.K. Rowling's and the Harry Potter series, which were instant classics in virtually every country around the world. Why? Because she penetrated an aspect of our humanity that's deeper than culture. That's not so easy to do. That's why there's American films and French films and Chinese films. But what is universal? That's what characterizes a great book. It can be read by anybody, anywhere, at any time, and still address the constituent aspects of our humanity. And thirdly, I would say, and most importantly, the quality of a great book is that it changes lives. It's an intelligence, not our own, that when encountered, transforms who we are by changing how we think and how we feel. You think of the Bible. How many people have encountered the Bible destitute, completely forlorn? They open the Bible up and a verse literally leaps out of the pages and they go through a metanoia. How many of you have had experiences where you're in a bookstore and all of a sudden either a book falls out of the shelf, hits you on the head, or you're just kind of intuitively led to something, a book, and all of a sudden it's the right thing for you in that moment. How does that happen? How is it that the I Ching, the Book of Oracles, so ancient that even in ancient China at the time of Confucius and Lao Tzu, nearly 3,000 years ago, it was considered ancient. And yet, in my life, I consider the I Ching my closest advisor, and it's never very far away. And in the 40 years that I've consulted with the I Ching, not once has it led me astray. How does that happen? Through the written word. When I encountered Lama Anarika Govinda in the foundations of Tibetan mysticism, It became a book that I have read continuously, probably 20 or 30 times. It was a book that I've always read around my birthday every year because what it contemplates is an inexhaustible well of wisdom that every time you drink of that well, something new emerges, even though you've read the words and underlined the sentences and the paragraphs and memorized certain sessions before. It still speaks. It's still alive. Extraordinary. That's why I love reading. I love to be challenged and transformed. Lama Anarika Govinda, the author of the Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism, was born as Ernst Hoffmann in Germany in 1898. His father was a wealthy German businessman who owned a cigar factory. And his mother was Bolivian. His father had met his mother on one of his journeys, and she came back to uh, Germany with him. But she died when little Ernst was only 3 years old. So he was raised principally by his father and various relatives. He was very precocious, but rather shy. In 1914, he was drafted into the German army, where he had proceeded almost immediately, thank God, to contact tuberculosis. So he was discharged. And he went to Italy to a sanatorium, still at a very early age, 16 years old, and went to school. And he got better in the sunshine of the Italian peninsula. And he began to read avidly in philosophy and religion, comparative religions. He was very taken by Arthur Schopenhauer. If you remember your Schopenhauer, he was the great German philosopher of the 19th century, whose book, written in 1818, the power of will, where he talked about the undergirding reality of the cosmos is will, the will to create, the will as it was interpreted by Nietzsche later, the will to power. And that there was this undifferentiated substrate to everything that is. Schopenhauer was very Buddhistic in his thinking, that there was no separation between selves, that everything was all emanating out of a creative will. And little Ernst Hoffmann was mesmerized by that, and he deepened his study. And then he went off to the island of Capri, and he joined an artist colony in Poditz that was a bohemian. This was the 1920s, the Roaring Twenties. So little Ernst went off to Capri. You can imagine what it was like to be in Capri at that time, in the aftermath of the World War, in which 10 million people were slaughtered in the trenches. And he deepened his study. He became an artist in his own right. He became a poet. And he concluded, age 16, that Buddhism was the most elevated of all the religious traditions. And that's a point that I'm going to comment on with a great deal of enthusiasm toward the end of my remarks today. He was very dedicated, and in 1928, he decided that he was going to throw himself in and become celibate, homeless in the great tradition of the Theravada Buddhists, and he went off to Sri Lanka, at that time called Ceylon, and threw himself into learning Pali and the various languages. It's the Pali Canon. Pali was the original language for Buddhism. He began to study other Eastern languages, and he, at a very early age, he was only in his early 20s. He founded the International Buddhist Union to unite Buddhists from around the world to engage in pure Buddhism, and he was in his, Saturn return, so he was really focused on Buddhism, and like many young people at that age, was radically ascetic in his intentionality and his practice, and to the astonishment of his fellow monks there in Sri Lanka. He went back to Europe temporarily to try to raise money for the International Buddhist Union. And then in 1931, he goes to Darjeeling in northern India for a Buddhist conference. And he was still building the International Buddhist Union, and he was very enthusiastic about uniting Buddhists around the world. He was very committed to the Theravada tradition. As many of you know, that's the oldest tradition of Buddhism and the most conservative. And it was only 600 years after the life of Buddha that the Mahayana tradition, the great vehicle as it's called, which we'll talk about later and next week or next month in more detail, arose. And then he did a side visit to Sikkim, right there by Nepal and Bhutan. And there he met a Tibetan Buddhist Rinpoche, the grand master of one of the high Himalayan monasteries. And after spending a few days and weeks with the Rinpoche, realized that the Theravada Buddhism was a portal, but that Tibetan Buddhism was the deepest layer of Buddhism. And for the rest of his life, he dedicated himself to study and to promulgate Tibetan Buddhism. And in the course of the 1930s, he traveled briefly to Tibet and went to Mount Kailash. And those of you who've been to Mount Kailash with Georgie and I back in whenever it was, 2006, almost 20 years ago now. Georgie went last year. That circumambulation to Mount Kailash is one of the great pilgrimages in the world. And so he went to Mount Kailash, and then the Second World War started. And even though by this time he'd become an Indian citizen and a British subject, because he was German, the Brits put him in an internment camp. And that with all the Germans that happened to be in India at that time, and because he knew the Nehru family, Jalaluddin Nehru, was the first prime minister of India, and they were working with Gandhi at that time for independence. And uh, Anarika Govinda, who had changed his name when he became a Tibetan Buddhist, was hanging out with the Nehrus and these other Indian nationalists. So he was put in an internship, but he was very anti-fascist. So the German Nazis that had been interned began to bully him and beat him up. So the Brits took Anarika Govinda and put them in other anti-fascist Germans into a special camp. And there he endured till the war was over. Came out 1945, wandered around for a while, wasn't quite sure what to do. He had founded an order at the behest of his Rinpoche. It was very small. He then met a Sikh woman, excuse me, a Parsi woman in Calcutta and fell in love and married her. She was also an artist and a poet. And then they began to really focus on building out the order that he had founded. They set up a chapter in Germany, eventually a chapter in the United States. And he began to be an individual that people sought out because of his erudite knowledge of Buddhism and in particular Tibetan Buddhism. He began to travel more and more to Tibet. They took photographs. He copied the mandalas. You can see those in various of his books. He worked together with his wife as a team, and he went back again in the 1950s. And it was in 1956 that he published the first edition of the Foundations of Tibetan Buddhism. Became an instant classic as a distillation of the great mantra of the Dalai Lama and Avalokiteshvara, the great god of compassion, also Kuan Yin, the goddess of compassion, OM MANI PADME HUM. So that's what the foundations of Tibetan mysticism is all about. It's a deep commentary on this great mantra of the Dalai Lama, the great mantra of both the Hindu tradition, but also the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. It's an extraordinary work, and I'm really looking forward to diving very deeply into it next time. He set up a little ashram in northern India near Darjeeling in the Himalayas, and people started to flock to him. Timothy Leary and Ralph Metzner, the big LSD gurus, Alan Watts, Robert Thurman, various and sundry of the people in the 1960s, the Flower Children and all that. That was the moment when people in the West were discovering the East and people were flocking to India, and he became like a Mecca. And he and his wife entertained, and finally they were so crowded in their ashram they had to put up a sign saying, "Please don't come in unless you have an appointment." That was pre-internet. They had to do it through letter. People showed up anyway. And then he began to experience failing health, came to the United States, and settled in San Francisco, not too far from where I am today in Marin County, right to the coast, no more than a 20-minute drive from where I am right now. There's a Zen uh, center, Tassajara, and Baker Roshi welcomed him, and he lived there with his wife, and then traveled a lot around the United States and to Europe. He went back to India once, but he basically stayed in Northern California until uh, January 14th, tomorrow. In 1985, he was with people in his home, and he was commenting on various aspects of Tibetan Buddhism, and he felt a sharp pain uh, move very powerfully up his back. He lay down on his right side and died laughing. Began to just laugh and laugh and laugh, and he died. What a way to go. Extraordinary. So that's the life of Lama Anarika Govinda, one of the great minds, I would say, and great hearts of the 20th century, who was able to go to Tibet and drink of the well of that tradition before the Chinese came in and essentially began to commit genocide against the Tibetan people and the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. You know, what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians in Gaza uh, now is what the Chinese communists did to Tibet beginning in the 1950s. So he was there during the tumultuous invasion beginning in 1950, all the way through that time. But he was able to go in the 1930s and the 1940s, and even in the 1950s when it was possible. So he was able to experience like Mount Kailash when it was raw, when it was unadulterated by modernity. What an extraordinary experience that must have been. And in his view, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition was the one tradition that had not been adulterated by Western encroachments. Hinduism, Buddhism in other countries had been adulterated one way or another. But in Anarika Govinda's view, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition was the one tradition through which one could reach back into primordial times. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next time. But what I want to um, focus on now, um, uh, which sets the stage for what we're going to discuss next month, is the importance of Buddhism and why someone like Ernst Hoffmann, age 16, would find Buddhism to be so extraordinary, such that he gave up his Judeo-Christian um, background and became a Buddhist for the rest of his life. As you may know, when Arnold Toynbee, the great British historian, um, I think it was in the 1960s, when he was asked what, in his view, was the greatest event of the 20th century, he said that the greatest event of his time was the arrival of Buddhism to the West. If you think about that, that's an extraordinary statement. You know, we had World War I, we had World War II, we had the collapse of the British Empire, we had Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we had the rise of the United States and the Soviet Union and mutual assured destruction. We gone to the moon. You know, we did a lot during the 20th century. And Arnold Toynbee said all those were important, but what was transformational was the arrival of Buddhism to the West. And I want to comment on this because this is why I decided to start 2026 with the foundations of Tibetan mysticism. I would like to recall The Secret of the Golden Flower. The Secret of the Golden Flower was a book like the I Ching that was already ancient in China before Confucius and before Lao Tzu. And in fact, by tradition, the book was distilled from its oral tradition into text by the teacher of Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism. So, what is important about that is less the book, although that's another extraordinary work. But excuse me one second. I've got grandkids and a dog coming through the front door, and I need to close the door of my study, or else we'll shortly have a circus in here. Hold on one second. I just became a grandfather on New Year's Day for the second time. And the little 2-year-old, little Charlie, just comes through. And if any of you have had kids, you know what the terrible twos were like with his dog, Moki, and his father. So if you hear any background noise, that's because I've entered grandfather land. But Carl Jung, in his commentary on The Secret of the Golden Flower, made a statement, an observation that I think is fundamental, particularly for all of us in the West to take in and understand. He said the reason why the West and the Abrahamic religions are so violent and destructive and intolerant and brutal to any kind of heresy or unorthodoxy is because the Western tradition, Western civilization, has no overarching unity, just polarity. As Heraclitus, one of the pre-Socratics, said, all is strife. That notion has characterized Western civilization and the Abrahamic religions from the very beginning. And that's why we are in the world we are in today, because that polarizing, dichotomizing, dualism, I'm chosen, you're not chosen, I'm the believer, you're the damned, I'm this as opposed to that. Though that dialectic has produced our world. And in Jung's way of viewing reality, the East has been positively pacific, serene compared to the West. There's been violence. There have been massacres. There's been all kinds of destructiveness. But it doesn't even begin to compare to the violence and the destructiveness that has ensued from Western civilization and the Abrahamic religions. Why? Because the Eastern metaphysic is by its very nature holistic. There are polarities for sure, but the great image of Taoism, the great image of the yin and yang, is that it's contained within an overarching wholeness. And it's that wholeness that enables the yin to become the yang and the yang to become the yin. And in every yin is a yang, and as every yang is an yin, and everything is in a flux of seasons, but within a larger whole. And this may be the most important observation that has ever been made about comparative religions. And within this context, I want to make a statement that may be controversial to some of you, but I think it's worth contemplating. You know, we often say to ourselves, all the religions are saying the same thing. It's all about love. It's all about this. It's all about that. They're all saying the same thing. Well, I'd like to submit to you that they are not. That all religions are not saying the same thing. There's a fundamental difference between Judaism and Buddhism, between Judeo-Christianity, between the Abrahamic religions and Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism. Just contemplate that for a moment. In the Eastern traditions, it's a seeker sitting in repose. Nothing could be more different than the Buddha sitting on a lotus blossom and Jesus of Nazareth being crucified to death on a cross. They're not saying the same things, my friend. They may be about spirituality. They may be about loving one another. But the undergirding metaphysical principles out of which they emerge are fundamentally different. And therefore, the consequences of these religions in our lives, in history, are significantly distinct. I could go much more deeply into this, but I want to just seed it in the beautiful minds of yours as something to contemplate. And this is why someone like Arnold Toynbee, one of the great historians of the 20th century, said that the greatest event in the 20th century was the arrival of Buddhism to the West. And I want to contemplate that for a second. When did Buddhism arrive? It arrived in the aftermath of two massive world wars. The Holocaust. There is nothing to compare to the Holocaust or to the genocide in Gaza in the East, with the exception of communist China. And that was the application onto China of a Western economic theory of Marxism. But nothing before. And it's very important for us in the West to acknowledge this. And so the whispers of Buddhism began to come to the West, and people like Timothy Leary and Robert Thurman and the Beatles and everyone else went to the East because there was a notion that the West was collapsing, that the Western metaphysic, whatever it was, having produced two massive world wars in the aftermath of which Tens of millions of people were killed. There's something wrong with this picture. And so when someone like Anarika Govinda was able to distill the essence of Tibetan Buddhism through a single mantra, OM MANI PADME HUM, that wisdom sort of took the West by storm. Because the West, at this moment of collapse, as the metaphysic of dualism came to its destructive conclusion, the metaphysic of the East, now reinforced by the latest research in cosmology and the latest research from physics, that there is no separate self. Everything co-originates. And a little photon on one side of the world and a photon on the other side are entangled. Everything is interacting. And every cell in my body knows the universe. And what keeps the universe a cohesive, beautiful whole is an information exchange. That is understandable, that is experienceable. And once one experiences this reality, you begin to blossom like a lotus, roots in the mud, stem going up toward the light. And then the lotus blossom bursts as it goes from water into sky. The reality that we in the West must contemplate is that the metaphysical traditions that have undergirded our civilization, Western civilization, Judeo-Christianity, Islam, the Abrahamic religions, no longer serve. And this is why no less an individual than Albert Einstein, when asked which religions will endure into the future, he said one, Buddhism. Because Buddhism understands that reality is not only whole and that everything is related to everything else and that there's no such thing as a separate self. There's no such thing as I'm chosen because I'm a Jew, I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, and you are not, and you're going to hell. That's absurd. Because I am you. You are me. And we co-originate together. Therefore, holding the wholeness of what is, compassion for all sentient beings is the only thing that can conceivably emerge. And that's why Buddhism largely has been so nonviolent. There have been exceptions, but they are exceptions over a tradition that goes back 2,600 years. So as we contemplate, and with this I close, and we'll open it up to questions and comments, starting with Georgie. As we contemplate the kind of spirituality we need now as we teeter on the brink of self-destruction, I believe, with Einstein, with Toynbee, with Anarika Govinda, and with many others, that the spirituality that needs to guide us is the spirituality of the East. It's the spirituality of oneness. And I emphasize this in this lecture because I think, particularly given what the United States is doing, not only having just invaded Venezuela and showing every intent of seizing Greenland and Cuba as it goes into the spasm of imperial overreach, not only because of what we're doing in terms of the genocide in Gaza and the extraordinary destruction of our world. We cannot, in my view, just go along saying it's all one. And we just need to be better Christians or Jews or Muslims because it's all saying the same thing. They are not. The Western metaphysical tradition is deficit because it's based on the metaphysic of dualism. And if we do not embrace a holistic metaphysic that's coming to the West from the East in this moment, as Toynbee said, we will no doubt destroy ourselves. Because the consciousness that produced the problem can't solve the problem. We need a new consciousness. And that's why Jung recommended The Secret of the Golden Flower to everybody as wise counsel in our world. So thank you, everyone, for being present today. I will now turn it over to my distinguished colleague from Hungary, Dr. Georgi Zaba, who will make some comments. And then I want to hear from all you students, and I'm going to ask you all to raise your hand. And when Georgie's done, we'll chat for a bit, and then we'll bring you in as you raise your hands for the balance of the time. Thank you, everyone. Georgie?
Thanks, Jim. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I was wondering that why you have chosen this book, and well, it's just, yeah, it is an amazing book. But first of all, comments on the great books. I think what makes a great book. In my understanding, there are more than just a handful of great books. It's very subjective what to you is a great book, but very much agree with what you said, that a great book changes you, makes you a better person, makes you a critical thinker. And as you associate with certain elements, ideas, thoughts, roles within the book, that what somehow just flows through you. So yeah, absolutely, definitely. That as you were talking about Lama Annagarika's past, or rather journey from the west to the east, something came to me that clearly he must have learned Tibetan from somewhere. And there is a famous Hungarian, what a surprise, not me, in the early 1800s. His name was Alexander Csoma de Körösi. And he was very similar to Lama Annagarika Govinda in a sense that he was very committed, almost like obsessed to the Tibetan culture. And he went all the way from Europe to Tibet. No airplanes, on foot, whatever, four-legged, whoever helped him. He became the first Tibetologist, and more to the point, he became the first person who compiled the English Tibetan dictionary.
Oh, wow.
So maybe Lama Annagarika Govinda learned from the dictionary. Who knows? We can't ask him, you know. But this Hungarian, he actually learned 17 languages And in many ways, I think he was very similar in attitude and being so steadfast on their path to Anarika Govinda. He himself went to Zanskar, to Ladakh, and was from an affluent family, just like Govinda, and gave it up all because just wanted to immerse themselves in the Tibetan culture. I remember that this book you give presentation on, you bought it for me in California the first time we taught the creative journey to dissertation course together, alongside The Way of the White Cloud. Do you remember?
Yeah.
And then after we went to Tibet, and I remember that the Way of the White Cloud is a much easier read than the Foundation of Tibetan Mysticism, but equally important books themselves. This book is definitely a meditation. You don't go into it like, oh, it's going to be like a story to, to cheer you, and then you will be laughing your head off. But every single chapter is like a deep immersion into a
Mm,
different dimension.
mm,
That's
mhm.
why I love it so much. Um, on your reference on Toynbee, I do remember many, many years ago, I read a comment from the Dalai Lama who said that one of the positives of the Chinese occupying Tibet was that Buddhism became international. And that saved actually Buddhism, because if it wasn't going to happen, such atrocity, Buddhism may not become, it just got locked within Tibet, and
Mhm.
not many people would have known about it. The About Buddhism, I so agree with what you said. There's one thing I would maybe challenge you on is not religion. As a Buddhist practitioner myself, I know it is more like a way of life. It's not religion, it's not a theory, it is a way of life. It is not that you need to believe in anything or anybody, doubt everything. That's what the Buddhist doctrines say. Experience everything and find your own truth. And that's why I love Buddhism so much. And that's why I feel that it is eternal. It really, really is eternal. So I can't wait for your next presentation, and I can't wait to hear more about this amazing book, because it's not just, it is wonderful to become one with the book itself when you're reading it, but it's so good to talk about it. And it is so important to discuss something in this super turbulent world. Everywhere is just so much turbulence, isn't it? Not just, geopolitically, cultures, gender collisions, is like, the planets aligning everything. But I don't want to keep it too long. Thank you so much again, Jim. Wonderful expose as always, and look forward to the second one. And let's see what others want to say.
Yeah, I want to see the doctoral students raise your hand so you can just get into the conversation. But while we're waiting, Chari Stower made the comment about Christianity, the lost Western spirituality that is just as important as the Eastern traditions. Um, I would say yes and no, Chari. I would say yes in the sense that Meister Eckhart, for example, Hildegard de Bingen, um, um, Bruno. There was certainly a tradition of mystics in the West that understood the Eastern notion of unity. And most of them were persecuted. and Bruno was burned at the stake. Meister Eckhart was almost burned at the stake. Hildegard de Bingen had to go through all kinds of things. So that that illustrates the point that I was making, that the prevailing um, orthodoxy was not able to absorb the unity consciousness because the polarity without a unifying principle gives rise to power. Let me comment on this for just a moment. And I want to see you you guys raise your hands. Oh, there, Laura, good for you. But I'll bring you in a second, Laura. If you had to characterize the Eastern traditions, they are traditions about wisdom for the reasons that Georgie just stated. And there's a good argument that Buddhism isn't even a religion at all. It's a way of being in the world that honors consciousness and inquisitiveness on the journey. The Western traditions are religions about power and the exercise of power. Look at Judaism. They get the Ten Commandments and they go into Canaan and they commit genocide. This isn't the first time. What we're seeing in Palestine isn't the first time that the Israelites have committed genocide. They did it in the immediate aftermath of receiving Torah. And as a little boy, I was the son of a missionary. As a little boy, I was astonished. I was reading the Bible, like you're supposed to read the Bible, and all of a sudden you're reading, they're slaughtering people and saying it's God's will. Come on. What's wrong with this picture? What's wrong with the picture of a guy being strung up on a cross and spear in his side, tortured to death? And that's supposed to be the love of God? I don't understand it. And I think that we in the West need to come to grips with the reality that we've inherited distorted religious ethics because it was based on an illusion, a delusion of dualism. That's point number one. Point number two is that what we're seeing even in the Catholic Church today under Francis and now Leo, the Catholic Church, just as an example, is still wrestling with, can we really say that all religions are the same? The Catholic Church tries to say it and then they back off. So the Protestants, for example, I'm the son of a missionary, conservative Baptist missionary. If you don't believe what my dad's told you, you went to hell. And this is important, that the Abrahamic religions are about belief, whereas the Eastern metaphysical traditions are about experience. And so I think it's really worth contemplating, particularly in the precariousness of our world, that we in the West have some very deep thinking to do in the spirit of what Mikhail Gorbachev called ruthless realism. Because not unless and until we're willing to do that, will we begin to humble ourselves to the fact that there's another reality. Look at what's going on geostrategically. The President of the United States is just out there careening around the planet without any concept that there's anybody else of importance out there. And that's that metaphysic of dualism. You see it in politics, you see it in commerce, you see it in the way we treat the environment, you see it in the way we treat our workers. This metaphysic of dualism is so deeply embedded in the Western psyche that it infects everything. And that's one reason why I encourage people to kind of be clear about that and very consciously adopt an Eastern metaphysic of unity. Because if you do that consciously, the pathway of liberation begins. If you can't do it, you end up like Pope Leo. Bless his heart. He can't quite get out of the box that the Catholic Church has fallen into because he's contained within the box. So I'm asking people to get out of the box. That's what Jung recommended, is get out of the box. And that's what happened to Anarika Govinda. Age 16, he got out of the box. And that saved his soul. So again, I'm saying this though in the spirit of truth pursuit. I imagine there's some of you who are really ardent Jews or ardent Christians or Muslims, and I want to appreciate that. I grew up in that kind of an atmosphere. I don't happen to believe that, But I want to honor this, and my remarks are in the spirit of truth pursued, not truth possessed. I'm just expressing my point of view, and I would welcome people to give other points of view as we proceed. So, Laura, I'm going to ask you to come on and promote the panelist. And if you want to open your video, oh, where did she go?
Mm.
Did we lose her?
Oh, she's here and she's turning on a video. We're good.
Uh, Hi.
Oh boy, you're sideways. I love it.
You're sideways to me. Hang on. Let's see if I can correct that. Is that better?
There we go. There we
Oh,
go.
good. What a brilliant presentation. You made me realize that my attitude, my practice, although I don't identify religiously, is fundamentally Buddhist.
Good.
Yeah, like that's kind of what my dissertation is on, is wholeness, is understanding that dualism is just something that's gone awry, taken us in many ways, we could say, causing all kinds of havoc because it's not true. We aren't two, we are one. And so where I also went to is a very unhealthy patriarch and very suppressed feminine, and that whole yin yang balance, which is fundamental as an embodied being, um, is also something, the whole sexuality thing, which is one of the things up, very forefront for the young people, because they kind of get it that we aren't dualistic. So we're just going to be this kind of everything, we're going to be all of it. In their attempt, I think, to uh, resolve this it's very painful to live dualistically. It
Yeah.
causes great suffering.
Mhm.
And then unless we sit with the suffering, which is the primary understanding of Buddhism, unless we sit with it and understand it, we will just propagate it. However we do that, we will just continue to act according to what we know if we don't know something different. So it
Mhm.
really comes down to being incredibly courageous to explore that wholeness within. I think Jung would call that his individuate, get out of the box, to understand that we're in a box. Even that's a lot. It takes huge courage. Anyway, so thank you, Jim. I really appreciate your understanding and your broad view and appreciation of Buddhism. And I have a few friends who are Buddhist, but I'm
Mhm.
not one to study a religion, to become a part of, even though Buddhism perhaps isn't even a religion. Uh, it's that whatever it is alive in my system. I was recognizing that as you were speaking. Um, that is my fundamental practice, is to be with life as it is.
Yeah.
And that will open my heart. That automatically gives me compassion, starting at home in this body with my wounded patterns of ancestry and collective. And then it develops into kindness with life. So I just wrote a Substack post on this whole thing before your meeting. So it's so funny, the timing of things. Anyway, I won't go on, Jim, because hopefully other students will speak. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. And just to comment on what Laura said for a moment, and I want to see more hands from the doctoral students in particular. This is a graduate seminar, everybody. We want to hear from you. Okay, I'll get to you in a minute, Paul, but I want to just comment. I am not being sectarian here. I'm not saying that
Mm,
we all become Buddhists. What I'm most fundamentally saying is that we need to consciously leave aside the metaphysic of dualism and
mm,
embrace the metaphysic of unity. I mean, look at the genocide going on in Gaza right now. Another baby froze to death last night.
mm.
torrential storms are sweeping through Gaza, and they're all intense. They're starving to death. Why? Because the Israelis say this land is ours. We're Jews. We're chosen. God gave us this land, and you now are going to be exterminated. That's the
Mm.
metaphysic of dualism.
Mhm.
And we have got to get beyond this, everyone. And I take a strong view on this, as you said, and I want to just make another point, and then Paul, you come in. I believe that what we're experiencing is the death knell of Judeo-Christianity.
Mm.
I
Mhm.
think that what the United States and Israel are doing in Gaza is such an outrage. It's a blasphemy against life. And it is
Yeah.
showing to the entire world the complete bankruptcy of this notion of chosenness, this notion of dualism, that there's me as opposed to Laura or
Mhm.
Georgie or Victoria. I am Laura. The Jews
Mhm.
are the Palestinians. They're cousins, for God's
Mhm.
sake. And yet they're being exterminated. That's the metaphysic of dualism that I'm driving at. And we've got to move beyond that quickly and elegantly if we're going to save ourselves. And so, anyway, a lot more I could say
Mm.
about this. As you all know who listen to
Mm.
me on Humanity Rising, I consider Gaza to be a crime of crimes.
Yes.
Mhm.
It's a crime of crimes, and it's
Mm.
manifesting live on TV the very metaphysic that we need to leave behind. So I'll leave it at that. And Victoria, you can say something, and then Paul,
Well, why don't
you
we go ahead and let the other people speak?
okay?
I
Allow
can
Paul to
always speak
talk,
another time, sure.
and I think and then promote the panelist. So go ahead, Paul. You can open your video, and oops,
How's that?
there we go. Hi, Paul.
Mhm.
Hello, team. Wow, Jim, such so much to reflect on there. Um, I want to make it more personal. I probably had dualism reading the book. There was a part of me that approached it academically, underlining stuff, trying to understand it, going back on it, and thinking, "Oh my God, I've got to get this." And then the other part of me fell into it and just experienced some of it. Um, and I'm still in flux. And my question is, therefore, I don't know, maybe it's a dualistic question. Is there a better way of approaching it? Because I found at one level I was getting it, and then I had to go back. I couldn't remember all the terms. I couldn't remember all the various things, and I was beating myself up as a poor academic.
Mm.
So I don't know
I
whether
feel
this
your
is
pain, brother.
okay.
Mhm.
So I guess what I'm asking is, uh, I don't know. I want some validation or something. Am I doing okay here? I really mean that. Like I really wanted to embrace this, and I think I'm getting it. And certainly that some of the concepts, some of the ideas were really very gracious for me. I don't know whether that question makes sense.
Oh, it makes eminent sense. I think all of us, the something like the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum both welcomes us in, but it's also a rock against which all our beliefs shipwreck.
Mm,
And that's its power. And as I said at the beginning, I've reread it maybe 20 or 30 times and underline and allow the sentences that seem completely nonsensical or inscrutable to work on my soul. And so the fact that you've had this experience is a good sign.
okay.
That means you're being addressed.
Yeah.
And what I'm going to do next time is I'm going to speak to the OM MANI PADME HUM
Yeah.
from the inside out. So we won't have to go through all the textual stuff, but rather it'll be a discourse with some reading, because there's some aspects of the book that are just sublime. That's what
Yeah.
Georgie and I love about Anarika Govinda, is the sublime way he uses language.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah.
And you just read a sentence and you go, my God.
Uh,
And sometimes I'll even write one on a little piece of paper and put it in my pocket and then just contemplate it during the day and just think, whoa, that's deep. That's deep.
mm, mm.
So your experience is what I still experience, brother.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
that's what
Thank
makes
you.
a great book.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Right. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. A great book is like fine wine. You don't want to drink it
Mm.
quickly. You
Mhm.
want to sip it. You want
Yeah.
to let it just, you want to admire its luster in the light and smell it and just let it. That's the beauty of a great book.
Mm.
That's why I
Mm.
don't use Kindle. I just want to hold the book.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, in Australia, we would call it a Penfolds Grange, which is our most supreme book, most supreme wine. So thank you.
Yeah. There's some good wine there in Australia. So, Victoria.
Jim, whenever you lecture, I'm always enthralled. And let me say that you've just done a fine, fine job. And in one sentence after another, one word after another. Many years I spent from 2009 taking notes of your lectures, and I even tried so today. But I must say, this is, of course, basic to human life. There is no such thing as chosen and compassion for all sentient beings. And that's what we all need to understand. And I think about back in 1961, I think, Joan Baez and Bob Dylan and songs of protest and songs of love. And I think we all got caught up in that. And Carlos Castaneda and all the possibilities. And I was talking with Jim Hickman, and he was on the other, we're the same age. He was on the other side of the country. And yet we all started reading the same books. We all started thinking the same way. How did that happen? And then I think about the 50s and how they broke away from the 40s, and the kids started jitterbugging and dancing with each other and touching each other in ways that really were the Africans already knew about that, about dancing and singing and with abandon. And that was new in this country. And I think that we built on that. But I remember getting on the Freedom Riders bus at 16, and my father pulled me off, and we were all very idealistic. And he said, people were beat up in this town next door, and you can't 40 miles away, and you can't go to the town 30 miles away because the same thing might happen, which it did. And so we had a lot to learn about being careful. But at the same time, just as in today, here it is again. Here it is again, where we are really gathering together in ways that I am extraordinarily pleased about in this country, with the No Kings gatherings and the gatherings about revising ACE, and having the similarities to Hitler and Mussolini and their armies of thugs that traverse the countryside. And so I always have hope, and I always have faith that we'll get through this time. I think at this point, there's a lot of fear and a lot of confusion. There are influencers. The internet has a lot of "I am better than you," and this is the way you should be. We were lucky, really, not to have the internet when I was young. We could gather up in this understanding about the sanctity of life that I think is harder for young people these days, or harder for older people. And I think that, and I'll just be quick, when you listen to something like Fox News, I remember working with an old person who had that station on in the US 24 hours a day. And they said the same things over and over again. It was like mind control. If it's something is said to you enough times, you start to believe it. So this is what we're up against. And we're up against a crazy person who, we won't go on about the sociopathic, narcissistic aspects of this person and the people who are actually behind what's going on with him. So, again, I remember reading The Secret of the Golden Flower very, very young. It was almost that it appeared in front of me. That there was an aspect that influenced a spirit that was, at least was in this country, and I think in other countries too, that we are in danger of losing, but at the same time, it's rising up once again. And I'm very pleased with that and very hopeful. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you picked up The Secret of the Golden Flower as a young person.
Yes, I do.
And Carlos Castaneda, but you're so
And
so right, that there was a spirit that just swept the land
yes, we all
in the
went to
60s.
Woodstock, 400,000 of us. Nothing bad ever happened. It was absolutely extraordinary, I must say. But that's another
Let,
story.
let me, I see that Genoa wants to come in. I'll get you in a minute, Genoa. We have just a few minutes left, but I want to address what Chris Bayer is saying, that in The Secret of the Golden Flower, Jung warned against forgetting our Western roots. And Peter Kingsley states that under our traditional Western narrative is mysticism that honors the earth and all life. I disagree that the West is all about power and the East is to be venerated. Um, it's not them or us. Chris, I completely agree. I'm a very deeply immersed Jungian scholar. To me, Jung was the great wise man of the 20th century. And I've read him extensively, as I imagine you have. And he always said that the West is not the East and the East is not the West. The point he was making in The Secret of the Golden Flower, as I understand it, is that in order for the West to become truly itself, it needed to drink deeply of the wisdom of the East. And that's why so many Westerners went East. You know, Timothy Leary didn't become kind of an Indian or Chinese. He stayed Western, but he illuminated his mind. The Beatles went through that. They illuminated their minds through the East and then reconnected with the West in a completely different way. I did that. I was actually born in China. I spent my formative years till I was 15 speaking Chinese in Taiwan. And so I had the great good fortune of being born over there, and my first spiritual experience in a Buddhist temple. And I've been doing Buddhist and Eastern practice ever since. But I'm a Western man. And I understand the West. I'm a 10th generation American, for example. So I want to take your point. It's a very important point. We don't become the East, but we need to embrace that metaphysic of the East that teaches us it's all one. And that's what's completely lacking in the Trump administration right now, in my view. And that's what completely lacking in the genocide that the US and the Israelis are committing against the Palestinians. There's no overarching sense of oneness. And when that is lost, you get Gaza, you get the Holocaust, you get World War I, you get the Crusades, you get the Inquisition. And nothing like that has ever happened in the East, with the exception of the Chinese genocide against Tibet. And so how we in the West take this complexio at this moment and bring unity to envelop the dualism is really in some ways the question of our time. The question of our time. And let me then just comment quickly on Ida's question about the State of the World Forum and the effect that it had on me. Very briefly, the effect of the State of the World Forum on me personally was profound. And I'd like to illuminate that for just 2 or 3 minutes. I was the convener, right? And yet I was not the originator. The originator was an ayahuasca plant in the Amazon in the fall of 2024. This is like Toynbee, the Buddhism wafting in from the East. A very good friend of mine, Lynn Twist, was leading an ayahuasca journey for a group of people in September 2024. They stayed up all night. In the middle of the night, an entity came to her in the midst of the journey and said, call Jim Garrison and tell him he needs to recreate the State of the World Forum. So in early October, when she got back to San Francisco, she called me up and said, Jim, I have no idea how or why this happened, but we were doing this ayahuasca and the entity came and said, you need to call Jim Garrison and tell him to recreate the State of the World Forum. In that instant, I knew in every cell in my body that I was being addressed to do something, even though before that moment I had no idea. I had no idea that that was to be done. No idea that that is to be done. No idea that I don't know whether you could hear that. I had a phone call. No idea that that was to be done. So the impulse, and this is the point, the impulse for the State of the World Forum did not come from the human realm. It came from plant intelligence.
Yes.
Because just like what Victoria was just saying about the 60s, I came of age in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
There was a spirit that was, we weren't thinking I have to go to India because I need to get a metaphysic of dualism. We just knew that we needed to go to the East. When Carlos Castaneda burst in the scene in the late 60s and early 70s, it just swept. And one of the great synchronicities of that time has been noted by many people. Between 1945 and 1948, 3 major events took place. Dropping the atomic bomb, UFOs appeared, and Albert Hofmann discovered LSD. 3 of the most consequential events in the 20th century, which have shaped the world, happened within about 2.5 years of each other. What was going on? What was going on in the 60s when young people like me, we were the first and only generation in the history of the world that en masse refused to fight?
Exactly.
Why did that happen?
We were all protesting against the war in Vietnam, marching in Washington, D.C., thousands of us.
Yeah, and now you've got the plants. Intelligence is impinging on us. What is happening now, to make a long story really short, you have human intelligence, you have nature intelligence, you have artificial intelligence, and you have cosmic intelligence. The ETs are impinging on us. AI is impinging on us. Nature intelligences are impinging on us because the human race is out of control. and it needs adult supervision. So that's why the forum was so impactful as it was, because we're now elevating the reality that we're not alone and we can't make it alone. There are four intelligences and only one future. And that's what we now have to contend with. So when Jung talks about this overarching unity, that's what's happening. That's what's happening. And it's an extraordinary moment to be alive. This is the most exciting moment probably in the history of the human race to be alive, because we are going through a metamorphosis where all the metaphysical traditions are collapsing. Thank God. And a whole new metaphysic of unity, not only among humans, but between humans and nature, humans and cosmos, and humans and technology. Just imagine the world that we will co-create with nature, AI, and the ETs, because that's what's up for humanity at this moment. It's an extraordinary moment. It's an extraordinary moment. But oh, I see we lost Genoa. So I think, Georgie, will bring this to a close. Thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone. This has been an exhilarating start to 2026. Again, truth pursued, not truth possessed. I know I can speak a little strongly, and people think I'm a little dogmatic sometimes. I actually don't mean to be. I'm just passionate about what I think. But I'm always open to higher truth, and that's why I hang around Georgie Szabo. And next month, we're going to dive into the foundations of Tibetan mysticism. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.